Hi, my name is Jason Youngblood. I'm the author of The Gospel of Napoleon Hill, Scholar or Scammer. I wrote that book in 2023 as a response to an article that I read called The Napoleon Hill, the Greatest Self-Help Scammer of All Time by Matt Novak. And so, what I wanted to do when I wrote that book was kind of go line by line with every claim that he makes because I needed to do that research for myself. I read the book Think and Grow Rich in 2020. I was a car salesman at the time, and COVID happened. That's a big story in everybody's, last 6 or 7 years as far as what that may have done to change the trajectory of their lives. And so I was selling cars. I was pretty successful at it. And when the pandemic happened, I was laid off and didn't know what I was going to do. So I started to sell life insurance over the phone. I wanted a work from home job so I wouldn't be in danger of catching the virus. And I could call people over the phone, talk to them about the details of a life insurance policy and sign them up remotely. So I began to do that. And the life insurance company, the name of that company was called TDT Financial, based here in Columbus, Ohio, where I live. And they began to not teach about how to sell life insurance. When I first started working as an agent with the company, they began to teach on how to set goals. And the book that they used in order to reference, how to do that in an effective and successful way was Think and Grow Rich. They also referenced Jim Rohn. They also reference Bob Proctor and other success authors who are well known in the industry today as far as writing what you would call self-help books. And so when I read Think and Grow Rich for myself, in order to know how to effectively set goals and for my professional life as well as my personal life, I discovered that it is a collection of 13 principles where Napoleon Hill, who wrote the book in 1937, over a 20-year or 29-year course of time, interviewed 500 or more of the wealthiest, most successful people of the early 20th century. So it started in 1908 when he was a newspaper or magazine reporter. The name of the magazine was called Bob Taylor's Magazine, and that editor of that magazine was also the senator from Tennessee. His real name was Robert Love Taylor, and Robert Love Taylor was actually really good friends with Andrew Carnegie, the wealthiest person in the world at that time. Andrew Carnegie made his wealth in steel. So he still has a steel mill that's still in operation today in Braddock, Pennsylvania, a suburb of Pittsburgh. And he made his wealth to be over worth $300 billion in today's dollars before his death in 1919. And so what he did was, as Napoleon began to be a reporter for his magazine, he commissioned Napoleon Hill to start a series of articles on what it takes to be successful. And he commissioned him to interview successful people. So it was Robert Taylor who first started this idea that he was going to have Napoleon Hill interview people for success stories. And the first person he introduced him to was his friend Andrew Carnegie. Now, I know they were personal friends because there's an article that you'll see in the Gospel of Napoleon Hill, Scholar or Scammer. Two articles actually where Robert Taylor does a eulogy for Andrew Carnegie. And a eulogy is not just at a funeral. It actually just means to speak well of. And so Andrew Carnegie was still alive at the time, and he puts out a newspaper article, a nationally syndicated newspaper article, speaking well of his friend Andrew Carnegie. Not only that, Andrew Carnegie was the president of a club called the Optimist Club that was started in New York City. And in 1909, there's a newspaper article where they held their first annual banquet of the Optimist Club. Theodore Roosevelt was a member, and also their first annual banquet. The keynote speaker was Robert Taylor, the senator from Tennessee, and so they chose Robert Taylor to be their keynote speaker for the first annual benefit of the Optimist Club, and so that's how you know they know each other. And also, you'll read and see in the book Napoleon Hill's first article with Bob Taylor's magazine. So there's verifying evidence that he actually wrote for Bob Taylor's magazine. And I'll say all that to say that as we go through these videos and look at point by point the claims that Matt Novak makes to devalue and to basically call Napoleon Hill a fraud and a scammer, we'll go point by point and pull up actual newspaper clippings and articles in my book from the PDF to show you that every single point can be debunked by historical data. And I think what happened is, and it's not to smear his name or anything, because I don't want to get into a negative campaign of who's right or who's wrong. But one, Think and Grow Rich did change my life. So the rest of the story of after I read Think and Grow Rich, I went back to car sales. They called me back. The pandemic began to clear up, and the income that I was making before actually doubled. So I was able to double my income from before, I more than double it in a short amount of time. I had actually set a goal to make a certain amount of money within 12 months, and I had made that amount of money in 6 months. And so I was able to more than double my income, and I was just really surprised at the phenomenal results just from applying the specific principles in Think and Grow Rich. There's 13 principles there, and he interviewed 500 successful people. And the first person he interviewed was Andrew Carnegie. And Andrew Carnegie was the one that told him to continue on and not just do some successful people, that he wanted him to spend 20 years interviewing successful people and not just put them in magazine articles for Robert Taylor, but to actually create and write a philosophy of individual achievement. That's what he called it, a philosophy of individual achievement or a philosophy of success. And to put that in a book, in a textbook, so to speak. So the first book Napoleon Hill wrote was called The Law of Success, and it was released in November or October of 1928. And it is very, very long and comprehensive. And that's the reason why that was the first initial individual philosophy of individual achievement before Think and Grow Rich was released in 1937. And so what you'll find is not, that book changed my life. And so I wanted to find out more about Napoleon Hill and who he was, because when I'm reading claims about how he was a fraud and a scammer, I don't want to be positively influenced for somebody who's not legit, somebody who had nefarious, or ulterior motives in their hearts to just scam people into buying a bunch of his books. So I wanted to find out the character of this man for myself. And so what I did was I went on an all-out hunt of newspaper articles, calling libraries, calling businesses, calling Chamber of Commerce's over a period of 2 to 3 years, and spent a lot of time digging through newspaper articles and microfilm to find out what the newspaper article said about Napoleon Hill. Because it's easy for somebody who lives 100 years later to say, oh, this person was a fraud based off of things that aren't really verified. And it's another thing to look at what people said about Napoleon Hill at the time. Because while Andrew Carnegie was alive and Napoleon Hill was alive, if he's making these claims, then somebody surely would have said it at that time. Or if he's getting arrested or if he's getting sued or anything like that, he's still a successful speaker, lecturer, and writer. There would be evidence of, his guilt. There'll be evidence of him actually being a fraud or a scammer at that time. So I wanted to see what history had to say about the life of Napoleon Hill and looked up the end result of every lawsuit that is listed in Matt Novak's blog, and also every time that he was arrested to find out the end result of that, and every other claim that is in that article. And so in these videos, we're going to go point by point, and I'm going to share my screen with you and just show you the first point and address that. So let me just share my screen here, and you will see. Just see if I can make sure you see this here. So the name of the article is The Untold Story of Napoleon Hill, the Greatest Self-Help Scammer of All Time by Matt Novak. And the very first claim he makes, All-American Huckster. And here's a picture of Napoleon Hill with dollar signs all behind him. He's kind of looking very culty and very sleazy here. The very first claim he makes in the first paragraph is that Napoleon Hill was a member of a New York cult, and that's what makes him so fascinating. He goes on to say the cult would become infamous in the late 1930s for trying to raise an immortal baby. But even those who know the story of immortal baby Jean, her name was Jean Gaunt, may not know the cult was inspired by Hill's teaching, practically using his most famous work as their holy text. And that work would be Think and Grow Rich. All right. So just a recap of the story is that the cult was called the Royal Fraternity of Master Metaphysicians. The cult leader, James Schaefer, and let me just stop sharing for a second here so you can see my face. The cult leader, James Schaefer, started the cult in 1929. He began to really become popular once he bought a mansion, the old Vanderbilt mansion in Long Island. All the newspaper articles published an article about it. It was a nationwide story, and he used it as kind of like a cult retreat. So his members could actually live there and stay in the same house and be under his teaching. And he believed that all negativity in life was a result of negative thinking. So he took positive thinking to the extreme. He basically taught that you should have no negative thoughts, no negative talk. And all of his teachings and all of his lectures and all of his writings taught people how to do that. So in 1939, 10 years later, the cult adopted Jean Gaunt, who was 6 months old at the time. It was around the winter of 1939, and adopted her from a poor mother and a poor father who couldn't afford to raise her. So they put out a newspaper article announcing their adoption of baby Jean, and they were going to raise her to be immortal and never die. And you heard that correctly. They were going to raise baby Jean to be immortal and never die by teaching her to think positives because they thought that they wanted to prove, as their theory, that death, which is a very negative thing to some people, was the result of thinking negatively. You only die or you only experience negativity throughout your life because of speaking negatively and thinking negatively. So he was going to take that idea to the extreme. Now, it wasn't too long, maybe the following year. I think he only had her for about a year, where the mother asked for the baby back. And because James Schaefer hadn't legally adopted baby Jean, he had to give her back. And then in 1955, after serving a jail sentence for fraud, he actually went on to commit suicide. So you'll read that in the epilogue of the book, which is the very last section of the book, The Gospel of Napoleon Hill, Scholar or Scammer. But let me pull up the section of my book and then read a few pages from that so that let me just make sure I got that. Bear with me where I pull that up. I'm just pulling up a digital copy of the Gospel of Napoleon Hill, Scholar or Scammer, so that I can show you what the book has to say about the findings of Napoleon Hill being a member of the cult. So while that loads, I'll just go back to the screen here. And so I'm going to load up the pages of that book and just briefly read through the story of the Royal Fraternity of Master Metaphysicians and what Napoleon Hill's affiliation with the cult was. Now, he was affiliated with the cult, but he was not a member. Another claim that Novak makes in his article is that he was the godfather to baby Jean as well, too. And I found no evidence of that in the actual historical documents, and which is what I'm basing that off of. So let me just see if that is ready to be viewed and go to those pages and go over and review the details of Napoleon Hill's affiliation with that cult. All right. So I'm going to share my screen with you now. So as you can see here, this is the epilogue. Is on page 641. It's a 700-page book there, so it's at the very end. And the name of the group was called the Royal Fraternity of Master Metaphysicians. So I'm just going to quickly read through this and then in the video. So the most surprising thing I found in my research of Hill's life was a critic accusing him of being an occult. The name of the alleged cult was the Royal Fraternity of Master Metaphysicians. In response to reading this attempt to damage Hill's credibility, I combed through hundreds of newspaper articles about the Royal Fraternity. I also looked for any trace of Hill's name being linked to the group. After analyzing several resources that mention the cult, I failed to find any evidence of him being a member. Therefore, I will use the final section of this book to provide the details that disprove that claim. In the fall of 1939, the Royal Fraternity of Master Metaphysicians announced that they would raise a baby to live forever. In response to the announcement, a poor hotel waitress volunteered her 3-month-old daughter, Jean Gaunt, for the experiment. Newspapers would refer to the infant as Baby Jean or the immortal baby. James Bernard Schaefer had founded the Royal Fraternity in Long Island, New York in the late 1920s. One of the major tenets of Schaefer's doctrine was that sickness and death were caused by destructive thinking. Therefore, as part of his controversial experiment, he stated that the baby would never be exposed to anything negative so that it could achieve immortality. Then, in January of 1940, Schaefer hosted a party to celebrate baby Jean turning 6 months old. During the party, a member of the royal fraternity would present the baby with a diamond ring worth $50,000, $1,122,053 in 2024. It was also reported that Napoleon and Rosalie Hill attended the party. However, they would give baby Jean a present that was nowhere near as expensive. Instead, they gave the baby a scrapbook to track her progress towards immortality. Hill's attendance at baby Jean's party is the only report of him being affiliated with Schaefer. Additionally, there is no historical data that supports his membership in the royal fraternity. So, as I read through the rest of this, you'll figure out why that is true, and I'm not just stating that out of thin air. So, although I found no record of Hill being in the royal fraternity, there is evidence that Rosalie was an active member. Just 9 days after baby Jean's party, Schaefer reported that he had chosen 6 members of the royal fraternity to become wealthy within 1 year. All right, so he's choosing 6 members, right, to become wealthy in 1 year. He also stated that his disciples' prosperity would be the result of his personal guidance. The newspaper article that reported Schaefer's new experiment listed Rosalie as a participant. Why not Rosa and Napoleon? Just Rosalie. It also identified her as a member of the royal fraternity and stated that she had been a student of Schaefer's for some time. Rosalie had been a student of Schaefer's for some time. The only reference to Hill in any of the official newspaper reports on the royal fraternity is that he was the wife of a member. 3 months after Rosalie agreed to participate in Schaefer's wealth project, their mansion in Mount Dora, Florida was listed for sale. So just 3 months after, their mansion is listed for sale. The Hills' initial purchase of the home was publicized in several Florida newspapers. According to the reports, Hill and Rosalie announced their plan to adopt 15 homeless children and raise them in the mansion. Additionally, court records reveal that they had bought the property in December of 1938. However, it wasn't until June of 1939 that they took up residence in their new home. Then, after living there for less than a year, they sold their large estate in April of 1940. Immediately afterwards, Hill relocated to Atlanta, where Rosalie remained in Florida with a new romantic partner. So here we can see that she was unfaithful to Napoleon Hill. And you'll read the results of that here in the next few paragraphs. Hill had moved to Atlanta from Mount Dora, Florida, to assist one of his students named Mark Wooding with his new restaurant. After Wooding failed to attract enough customers, Hill offered to move there to help him. Why is he moving to Atlanta when he lives in Florida with his wife? You'll see here that they actually were separating and the marriage was ending because of infidelity. So to generate more business for Wooding's cafeteria, Hill would deliver a series of lectures to the restaurant customers while they dine. The critic who claims that Hill was a member of the royal fraternity also alleges that he started a magazine with James Schaefer, the cult leader. The source of his inside knowledge is a statement by Schaefer claiming that the magazine was Hill's idea. So this is further, this is to further the claim that Napoleon Hill was affiliated with the cult by starting a magazine with James Schaefer, just to say he was a member of the cult. Even if they did start a magazine together, that does not mean he was a member of Schaefer's cult. All that means is that that's evidence of Napoleon Hill's wife, Rosalie Hill, being a member. And so through that affiliation, Napoleon Hill wanting to do business with James Schaefer and start a magazine together because they had similar topics. Even James Schaefer was an extreme version of the positive thinking self-help industry at that time. But Napoleon Hill was wanting to start a magazine that had to do with positive thinking. Newspaper articles revealed that Schaefer's statement was in response to one of his followers suing him for stealing $9,000 or $201,969 in 2024 from them. According to the report, a member of the royal fraternity named Mina Schmidt had loaned Schaefer $4,500, $100,984 in 2024. He persuaded her to do so by revealing that he heard a voice saying, "Mina is going to give me money." When Schmidt inquired about the source of the money she was supposed to give him, Schaefer concocted an elaborate prophecy. He claimed that her employer would die in the near future and leave her $75,000 in the will. $75,000 is $1,683 and $683,080 in 2024. Surprisingly enough, Schaefer's prophecy was at least half right. Only 3 months later, Schmidt's employer died as predicted. Wow, so the half the prophecy was true. Nevertheless, she left Schmidt just $3,000, not $75,000. $3,000 is $67,323 in 2024, far less than her trusted leader had foretold. Schaefer then reassured her that there was a second will that guaranteed her the remaining $72,000. As a result of Schaefer's amended premonition, Schmidt loaned him an additional $2,000 and invested $2,500 in his new magazine. However, it turned out there was no other will, nor was there any more money to inherit. After being disappointed by Schaefer's inaccurate prophecy, Schmidt sued him for the $9,000 that she had loaned him. During his court trial, Schaefer pleaded guilty to Schmidt's charge of grand larceny. Then, after he was sentenced to 2.5 to 5 years in prison, he changed his plea to not guilty. To justify changing his plea, Schaefer claimed that his lawyer entered the guilty plea without his permission. It was only during the statement in which Schaefer changed his plea that the critic claims he mentioned Hill as the originator of the magazine. For further understanding of Schaefer's alleged implication of Hill, the statement from the critic's report is reprinted here. One Napoleon Hill came to me on or about the first day of December 1939 and told me that he had an opportunity to purchase a magazine called Psychology for about $5,000, $113,012 in 2024, and that we could each put up $2,500 and become partners. He told me that although the magazine was then in very bad condition, it had once made $25,000 a year, and he thought that it could be built up again. I was interested, but told him that I hadn't the money. I decided, however, to try. I decided, however, to try to borrow $2,500 to go into the venture and with it in view, approached Mina Schmidt for the loan. I clearly stated to her the purpose for which I wanted the money, what I had been told by Mr. Hill concerning the history of the magazine, and what he thought of the future prospects, notwithstanding its poor financial condition at that time. None of the newspaper reports of Schaefer's case include the above version of his sworn testimony. Moreover, Hill is never mentioned in any of the articles that printed Schaefer's statement. So there's actually newspaper articles that print Schaefer's statement in response to his lawyer making a guilty plea, but don't mention this statement here. So, I mean, that statement may exist. So he may have actually said that and said that Napoleon Hill was business partners with him, but it doesn't say anything about him being a member, which is the true, accusation there. So although the papers failed to connect Hill to Schaefer, they do reveal a different culprit who partnered with Schaefer to publish his magazine. So I personally didn't find any articles that said Napoleon Hill was business partners in this magazine with James Schaefer. But as we read here, while Schaefer didn't end up purchasing Psychology magazine with Hill, he did join forces with the publication's editor, Henry Knight Miller. So this is who he ended up partnering with, not Napoleon Hill. Miller had been the pastor of the Hanson Place Methodist Episcopal Church in Brooklyn, New York. He then got into the journalism business, and started Psychology magazine sometime around 1923. Then in May of 1930, Miller was indicted for helping two New York brokers sell stocks in an oil company associated with none other than S.E.J. Cox. Now, S.E.J. Cox is a Hill affiliate that you'll read about earlier in the Gospel of Napoleon Hill. The very same oil man who Hill had written promotional articles for in Hill's Golden Rule and Truth magazine. After being sentenced to 8 years in prison in January of 1924, Cox served just 2.5 years and was released in July of 1926. Then in 1929, Cox paid Hill a visit at his New York City office, claiming that he was a changed man and ready for a fresh start. So this is S.E.J. Cox. So you're reading some of his story now, but The full story of his relationship with Napoleon Hill is earlier in the book. According to Hill's memoirs, Mastermind, he was impressed with Cox's change of heart, so he introduced Cox to his fellow New York residents, Hazel Chrisman, and Henry Knight Miller, who lived in Brooklyn. It was during this time that Cox's wife, Nellie Cox, became the secretary for the Universal Oil and Gas Company. Therefore, her newly freed husband recruited Chrisman to help him in the selling of stocks in the company. He then asked Henry Knight Miller to write an article in Psychology magazine, in Miller's magazine, Psychology magazine. Miller was the editor, to encourage his readers to buy stocks as well, buy stocks in SCJ Cox's oil company. Soon afterwards, Cox and Hill began corresponding about the success of Universal Oil, prompting post office inspectors to confiscate their letters. The postal inspectors would then confront Hill in his office and demand that he explain his association with Cox. Then in February of 1930, Cox, his wife, and several other officers of Universal Oil were charged with selling stocks without a permit. Although Cox was sentenced to 10 years in prison for the crime, the charges against Miller were dismissed. By September of 1940, Miller had become the associate editor of James B. Schaefer's magazine. Prior to collaborating with Miller, Schaefer had operated his own magazine called Truth Digest. Newspaper articles from that time period began mentioning Truth Digest in October of 1938. Then 2 years later, Schaefer would partner with Miller to merge Truth Digest with Psychology magazine. They're called their fusion of publications Think What You Want magazine. So there's a few things here to unpack. So first of all, Henry Miller was the one who actually partnered with James Schaefer, not Napoleon Hill. So even if James B. Schaefer and Napoleon Hill or Hill approached James B. Schaefer about purchasing Psychology magazine, that's not what happened. The actual end of the story is that James B. Schaefer and the actual editor of that magazine, Psychology magazine, he wasn't selling it. He just partnered with James Schaefer. The other thing is that James Schaefer had his own magazine called Truth Digest, and then Henry Miller had his magazine called Psychology Magazine. And so they actually brought their two magazine publications together and called it Think What You Want magazine. And so they were co-editors of that. And as you can see in the title of the magazine, that it had to do with the positive thinking. So they were, further kind of proving that James Schaefer was taking positive thinking to the extreme. Just, think what you want and what you want will come into your life. Additionally, Mina Schmidt's case against Schaefer reveals that she invested in his new magazine sometime after August of 1940. So this was the time that Mina Schmidt actually gave him the money to buy Psychology magazine, or to actually go into partnership with Henry Miller to actually be co-owner of Psychology magazine. So therefore, the timing of when Schaefer borrowed money from Schmidt and when he started Think What You Want is synonymous. These details reveal that Schaefer didn't borrow $2,500 from Schmidt to buy Psychology magazine with Hill, as he had claimed. He had borrowed the money to start an entirely new magazine with Psychology's editor, Henry Knight Miller. Not only that, during the time that Schaefer started his magazine, Hill was living in Atlanta working with Mark Wooding. So in August of 1940, which is the date of the article that reveals that Mina Schmidt gave him $2,500, Schaefer, to actually go into partnership or buy Psychology magazine or go into partnership to start a new one, whichever one or both. Hill wasn't even living in New York at the time. He was not affiliated with Schaefer at that time either. Since Rosalie had remained in Florida to live with her new love interest, it was only right for her to file for divorce from Hill. So in December of 1940, she did just that. Then in January of 1941, here's further proof Hill was not a member of the Royal Fraternity of Master Metaphysicians. In January of 1941, the one-year anniversary of Schaefer's Wealth Project, newspapers reported that his 6 members were still not rich. When interviewed for an update on the experiment's success, Rosalie responded that she was doing all right. So you'll notice that Napoleon Hill is a famous author. Why isn't she rich? She's not getting any of the royalties at this time of Napoleon Hill's book sales. So she threw her name in the hat to be one of the 6 cult members to be rich within 1 year. And it was because she was not together with Napoleon Hill. So that's why he wasn't affiliated with the cult. Not only did he despise cults and religious movements, you'll read in his writings, everything he says about religion is that nobody should be actually telling people to be one thing. He's open to all religions and all faiths and all beliefs. And so he's not going to actually try to have a following around positive thinking. He's going to let people do that individually. And if there are believers or people of faith, to do that in their own way. So he did not promote joining a particular group who preached one thing. So, and then his wife here is also not, mentioning him in this project. He's not a part of the project because they were separated. And you can see here from her not being wealthy or Napoleon Hill not being mentioned that they are two different entities at this time. This information reveals that she was still participating in Schaefer's experiment after she filed for a divorce from Hill. That same month, Hill would move to Clinton, South Carolina after accepting a position as a resident instructor at Presbyterian College. Their divorce was then finalized in March of 1941. Rosa Hill then went on to marry her divorce lawyer, Cecil Lichlider, in April of that year. This order of events indicates that Hill and Rosalie were separated for most of 1940 and that only Rosalie was a member of the royal fraternity. And then here are a few of the newspaper captions here. So this is James Schaefer. I'll minimize this so you can see his picture. Minimize it a little bit more. So this is James Schaefer here. He was born in 1896, died in April 26, 1955. This is a picture of the Colts mansion where they lived together. This is a picture of baby Jean with some of the cult members around him and the announcement that they had adopted her. And then in this article here, Schaefer announces that he had plans to adopt baby Jean. The article reports that he was formerly a Christian Science leader and taught that sickness and death are caused by destructive thoughts. It also reveals that Schaefer believed that baby Jean would achieve immortality. According to Schaefer, she would do so by being raised in an environment where disease and death are never spoken nor thought of. As part of the baby's upbringing, she would be given a vegetarian diet and attended by 70 of Schaefer's followers who also stayed in the mansion. So that was their plan there. Um, You'll see in this newspaper article here, the caption is a newspaper article reports that Schaefer hosted a party to celebrate baby Jean's turning 6 months old. During the party, one of the members of the royal fraternity gave baby Jean a diamond ring worth $50,000. The article also reveals that Napoleon and Rosalie Hill gave her a scrapbook to record the signatures of those who donated to her educational fund and to track her progress toward immortality. That is the only affiliation Napoleon Hill had that is according to the historical documents of newspaper articles. And then in this article, the headline there, you'll see Rosalie here, and she's standing next to James B. Schaefer. And this just says that Schaefer, fourth man from the left, announces that he has chosen 6 of his members to become wealthy within 1 year as a result of his personal direction. Rosalie, third woman from the right, is mentioned as one of the members who he selected for riches. And then if we go to the next article here, great wealth predictions fell for 6 singled out by metaphysician. The caption just says a newspaper article reveals that 6 of the members of the royal fraternity who Schaefer had chosen to become rich are still not wealthy after 1 year. Rosalie is mentioned as one of his members, not Rosalie and Napoleon, and is described as a woman writer who is doing all right, quote unquote. She had recently released her book, How to Attract Men and Money. And it was ironic enough, she released this book, How to Attract Men and Money, in 1940 while she was still legally married to Napoleon Hill and then divorced him a few months later. So she wrote a book on how to attract a man who has money and almost to kind of be a gold digger, so to speak. And she did that with Napoleon Hill. So she wrote this book bragging about how to do that. And then later on that year, divorced him. You'll see this newspaper article where baby Jean is back with her mother. Baby Jean is 1 or 2 years old here. And the caption just says a newspaper article reveals that baby Jean's mother, Catherine Gaunt, has brought her back home and out of the custody of the royal fraternity. The next newspaper article, where's baby Jean now? She's housewife and mother.
Caption this reads, a newspaper article reports that Jean Gaunt stated that she didn't want anybody to know that she was baby Jean. It also reveals that Schaefer went on to be sued by Mina Schmidt for failing to pay back the $9,000 she loaned him. The article then reports that Schaefer was sentenced to serve 2.5 to 5 years in Sing Sing Penitentiary, then committed suicide in 1955. He actually, after all his positive thinking, talk and lectures and teachings, and that think only positive thoughts and feel only positive thoughts, and speak only positive things. He actually went on to struggle with mental health and depression, unfortunately, because that's not, anything to brag about, even though he led people astray with his teachings. He did so by putting a hose on a exhaust pipe of a car and sucking in the fumes. So it was a very tragic way to end his life because he had some potential there by wanting to spread positivity. This newspaper article, Catherine Gaunt, Baby Jean's mom, has passed away, and you'll see here that Baby Jean is listed, and she has a new spelling for her name, not Gean. So Catherine Gaunt passes away on October 24th, 1997. Her daughter, Baby Jean, is listed as Jeanne, Catalanato, not Gaunt. As an adult, Baby Jean had married Casper Catalanato and changed the spelling of her first name from Gean to Geanne. The next newspaper article here is, well, the next photo or picture here is Jeannie Catalanato, or Baby Jean. And I just revealed that I contacted Jean Catalanato, and she confirmed that she is Baby Jean. As of the writing of this book, she is still alive. When Miss Catalanato and I spoke, she told me she didn't mind if I shared that she was Baby Jean. When I asked if she would share anything about her brief time in James Schaefer's custody, she simply said, I'm still alive, but I won't live forever. And I did call her this past June 30th, so 2 weeks ago, as of today. Today's July 15th. And I actually called her and wished her a happy birthday. I do that every year. I'll soon be visiting her so that I can meet her in person. In this article, metaphysics master held on charge of swindling disciple. And the caption just says Schaefer pleads that he is innocent of stealing $9,000 from Mina Schmidt. The article reveals that Schmidt inherited $3,000 from her former employer in August of 1940. She then invested $2,500 in Schaefer's magazine. I see why she wanted her money back. She pretty much gave him the whole thing. She had 3,000. This newspaper article, metaphysician leader is jailed. And the caption just says a newspaper article reveals that Schaefer was sentenced to prison for grand larceny on May 5th, 1942. He had claimed that his original guilty plea was made against his wishes. This newspaper article, use of psychology, will be topic of Talk Tuesday. And then that caption that says Henry Knight Miller is listed as the associate editor of Schaefer's Think What You Want magazine. After Mina Schmidt gave Schaefer $2,500 to start a magazine, he launched a publication with Miller, not Hill, as his partner. This is another newspaper article here. And then to see what the caption says. A newspaper article reveals that Schaefer's Think What You Want magazine was previously called Truth Digest. So all he did was just merge his Truth Digest with Miller's psychology magazine to make it that. This newspaper article, the caption says Supreme Court Justice Henry E. Lewis orders S.C.J. Cox and Henry Knight Miller to stop selling stocks in the Universal Oil and Gas Company. So, S.C.J. Cox is affiliated with Hill twice. He's affiliated with him in 1919, and then he pops up in this story as well too with his affiliation with James B. Schaefer, because James B. Schaefer was co-editors of Think What You Want magazine with Henry Knight Miller, who was also affiliated with S.C.J. Cox by helping him sell oil stocks. So Miller had agreed to help Cox promote the stock by offering his expert opinion that the oil fields were a wonderful investment. This article here, a further purge of oil firm is due. A grand jury investigates Universal Oil and Gas Company, S.C.J. Cox's company. The investigation was the result of Henry Knight Miller and Cox being charged with using the mails to defraud. And there's more articles on that arrest from Henry Knight Miller. Here's the article proving that Napoleon Hill was in Atlanta during the time that Henry Knight Miller and James Schaefer were going into partnership with one another. He wasn't even around. He was in Atlanta. So this is August of 1940, the same time he borrowed the money from Mina Schmidt to start the magazine. 7 months after Rosalie agreed to participate in Schaefer's wealth experiment, Hill moves to Atlanta without her. Then he began delivering a series of lectures at a restaurant to help one of his students, Mark Wooding, attract more business. Um, Yeah, and so that is the story of James Schaefer there. I'm going to stop sharing. So I'm going to be posting these videos in response to Matt Novak's blog, uh, Napoleon Hill, the greatest self-help scammer of all time, and just go point by point, find the actual corresponding evidence in the Gospel of Napoleon Hill. That way, people who are like me are either students or disciples of Napoleon Hill or have read Think and Grow Rich and were really positively impacted of it. My goal is to stop the smear campaign, so to deter people from reading information that could positively affect their lives. My goal has nothing to do with Napoleon Hill or vindicating his name because I didn't know him personally. He lived 100 years before me. It's more about his work that had a positive impact and making sure that people know that he wasn't a fraud, that he wasn't a scammer, and validating his claims that he actually got that information from wealthy people that he actually knew and met, and that he wasn't just trying to sell books without actually being a positive person himself. So every time he was sued, every time that he was arrested, and the details of his marriages, we'll be going through those point by point as Novak makes those claims. And I know most people tell you to like, share, and subscribe. I'm not going to tell you to do that. I feel like, all the channels I subscribe to, they just bombard me with notifications and it's too much. I have too busy of a life doing, more effective things than just watching YouTube videos. So you know where to find me. The name of the channel is The Gospel of Napoleon Hill, Scholar or Scammer. But if you want access to the actual notes of each point that we talk about, even to the James Schaefer story, I can either give you a free PDF copy of the book, so that way you have the PDF copy. But the book is actually for sale in a few different versions. So you can buy it on Kindle for $20 as an ebook. You can also purchase it on Audible as an audiobook. And then there's three versions of the print book. There's the full 700-page book with not only the story of Napoleon Hill, but the newspaper articles verifying his claims. And then there's 4 volumes. So instead of 700 pages, I divide that by 4. And there's a volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, volume 4. So you can read the book and get the content of the story in small bites and 4 smaller bites. And then there's also an abridged version with a companion guide. So the abridged version is just the story of Napoleon Hill. It doesn't have any newspaper articles in there at all or any historical evidence. It's just the text of Napoleon Hill's story. It's about 100 pages. And then with that, you want to get the companion guide. You can just read the story of Napoleon Hill, but if you are more investigative and you want to know the tea, so to speak, or the juice of, what really happened, then you can get the companion guide and they just have the newspaper articles only in there. And that is all available on Amazon.com. You can just search for the Gospel of Napoleon Hill, Scholar or Scammer, or my name, Jason Youngblood. Also, message me. You can directly reach me to request a free copy of the PDF or any section of the PDF. I can always just create a portion of the story of the book and send that to you so that you can just have that part of the story that you're interested in. So any of these points you're just interested in that section, I'll send you a free PDF to that. Just message me on the Facebook page, The Gospel of Napoleon Hill, Scholar or Scammer. All right. Talk to you guys later. Thanks for listening.